So I figured I would preface this video by saying I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm not really a YouTube girly, but I had a friend of mine tell me something recently that kind of stuck with me. I say this person is a friend. I've only um had a handful of conversations with them, but they're becoming a friend. And so as I was having a conversation with this person, I was sharing with them that I sometimes struggle with analysis paralysis. And I was like, I've kind of felt like I should start YouTube because they were asking me what I do for work. And I was telling them I'm an author and I'm on TikTok. And I was like, I've kind of felt the need to like branch out into YouTube and start sharing some stuff over there, but I don't really know what I'm doing. And so that makes me nervous and I get analysis paralysis and blah, 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 as one does with their acquaintances, right? And so um, this person said something though that really got my attention. They said, you know, sometimes I think people need to see us do things imperfectly because then it gives them the courage to do the same. And something about that just kind of set me free from feeling like everything had to be perfect before I started. And it's ironic because it's kind of the same process as writing a book. Like they always say you can't edit a blank page. You have to make it exist before you can make it good. And I knew that about book writing, but for some reason that wasn't translating into starting a YouTube account. So here I am. I'm starting the YouTube. It's not going to be great at first. It's not going to be pretty, but I'm sure I'll figure it out along the way. So here we go. But I did kind of feel the need to get on YouTube and share some of my journey because I've just noticed that there's a lot of people who feel like they need to write a book. They feel it on their heart that like they have a story to share and they feel that internal pull to kind of write it down and share it with the world. And a lot of people just don't know where to start. And that's how I was. I thought that being an author was impossible, even though it had been a lifelong dream of mine. I thought it was impossible because I didn't know how to do it. And I didn't know anyone else who knew how to do it. And so I felt like I couldn't even ask anyone questions. And so I just kind of fumbled my way through it. And I'm going to share the story of how I got started and all of that. I wanted to welcome anyone here who wants to write a book, anyone who has felt like they just want to share their story, but don't know where to start, don't know who to ask. That's kind of why I'm creating this channel. I'm creating it so I can walk you through the process that I went through so that I can give you insight on what I learned along the way. And hopefully that will help you on your journey and get you a little bit closer to writing your own book. You're going to hear roosters in the background. I live on a little makeshift farm. So you're going to hear chickens, roosters, maybe even a donkey every now and then. So just ignore all the background noise. We're just chit chatting here. Like I said, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be pretty, but it is going to offer value. So, um, I feel like I need to start off with sharing my story of how I even got here in the first place. Because like I said, I was just a stay-at-home mom living on a little hobby farm, in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi. Like I didn't all the odds were stacked against me on becoming a successful author. And it sounds weird to even say successful, but like it sounds kind of arrogant, even though it's kind of true. I was on the bestseller list with my first book. So this is my first book that I wrote. It's called Do You Mind? Gosh, they're right outside the window. This book is called 7 Days to a Life of Limitless. It was my first book that I wrote. It's only about 150 pages long, but it became a bestseller on Amazon in the new releases category. I think it made its way up to number 2 in the new releases category for this genre. And it wound up selling over 10,000 copies in the first year. And that's kind of unheard of for a self-published, relatively unknown first time author. So when I say success, that's what I mean. I mean, that is kind of successful. I'm not trying to sound arrogant by saying that, okay? Because like I really do not like to brag on myself, but I feel like it's not bragging on me. I'll get to it. I'm going to land this plane. Just stay with me. So let me just give you the backstory on how I got here. Like I said, I was just a stay-at-home mom living on this little hobby farm in the middle of nowhere, and when I got pregnant with my son, my husband had told me, "You can quit your job. My job can support the both of us. I want you to have the freedom to be a stay-at-home mom if that's what you want, because that would just set our family up for success if I'm able to really intentionally pour into teaching my son and setting that foundation of just love and acceptance in a family. I know not everybody's able to do that, but for us and our family, that's what we felt was the right move. And so when I got pregnant with my son, I was sick as a dog, and my husband was like, "Just go ahead and quit now and you can stay home." So I did. And so I was home the whole time I was pregnant with him, and I really got very antsy during that time because I felt like I started to struggle with my self-worth, and I started to feel like I'm not contributing anything financially. I'm not doing anything to help our family in that way. I've just put a bigger burden on my husband. It felt like I was just really struggling to see my value. And so my husband, he tried to reassure me, but it was just really more of an internal battle. And so I had tried over the course of several years. I was like, I'm gonna offer something. I'm gonna help contribute in some way. And I had a lot of just hobbies and talents. I've always been a creative person. I've always been a crafty person. And so I was like, I'm going to, you know, make drawings and sell them on Etsy. I'm going to open a sewing business. I'm going to take these gifts I have that other people might not have, and I'm going to put them to use. I'm going to make some money. I'm going to contribute to my family, because that was where my value was coming from. If I was doing nothing, I felt worthless. Okay. That's important for the story. So keep it in mind. But I tried all of these businesses and I failed at every single one of them because I'm not a business savvy person, never have been. Like I said, I'm very creative. And I feel like you can be creative in the area of business, but if you're like an artist, it is very rare to have an artist brain that is also like logical and good at things like engineering and marketing and business and et cetera, et cetera. Like your brain tends to go one of two ways, and mine goes art. And so I just never understood the business side of things. And so every business that I tried to start would just crash and burn. And I must have started over 5 businesses, over the course of those few years. These roosters are literally right outside my window. So I'm so sorry that's gotta be so distracting, but we're just gonna keep going because, like I said, done is better than perfect, and I've gotta practice what I preach. But, yeah, so after I started all of these businesses and I failed miserably, I was still struggling with my self-worth, even though I was providing value to our family by raising my son and being home with him. I still just struggled with feeling like that wasn't enough. And so I had never had it on my radar to become an author, even though it had been a lifelong dream. When I was in the 5th grade, my teacher stopped me on the playground because we had started doing creative writing exercises in the 5th grade. And my teacher stops me on the playground and she says, "I read your exercise, and I just know that I'm going to open up the newspaper one day and I'm going to see your picture, and it's going to tell me that you became an author because your writing exercise was so good and I thought you did such a great job." And that just stuck with me. I was like, I would love to be an author someday because that sounded like my dream job. I loved reading. I loved books. I loved stories, bringing things to life in my imagination. And I thought, man, if I could contribute something like that into the world, that would just be the most beautiful thing. Let me run this rooster off because he's really starting to bother me. Hold on just a moment. Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry. That was just terribly irritating here and trying to making it hard for me to think. So where was I? I was talking about how I had always wanted to write a book, but I never felt like it was really in the cards for me because it just seemed so difficult. My teacher had told me that she thought I would become an author someday, and so that was what kind of kept the dream alive was when you have somebody call it out in you, it just kind of gives you that hope to hang on to. And so ever since I was in the 5th grade, I just had this thing in the back of my mind telling me that I was going to become an author someday. Well, fast forward, I'm married, I have a child, I am trying to become a serial entrepreneur, and nothing is working out. And I'm just failing miserably and I'm feeling pretty worthless at this point. And then 2020 hit. We all know how that went corporately, like on a global scale, but it also created a lot of personal complications for me too. So in September of that year, we lost my well, let me back up. So 2019 was one of the hardest years of my life. Here I was already feeling worthless, already feeling down. And then in 2019, I just had loss after loss after loss. I lost my dog, my family lost one of our homes that was like a gathering place for the whole family. And I just kept losing all of these things that mattered so much to me. And so I had a lot of hope for 2020. Surely this year can't be worse than 2019. And yet it was. So in September of 2020, we lost my grandmother, not to COVID, but due to just dementia related complications. She had a really bad fall and never recovered because her mind wasn't quite right. And the week of her funeral, my dad was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of stomach and esophageal cancer. And so we didn't know if he was going to make it either. And it was at that point that I was just probably at one of the lowest points I had ever been in my life. And I thought to myself, I can't keep going like this. I cannot keep going feeling worthless, feeling trapped, feeling like I am spinning my wheels and nothing is getting better. And so I did the only thing that I knew to do, which was to pray, to cry out to God. I had been in church my whole life. I grew up Christian in a Christian home, and my family was always in church, but I had a really, I'm not sure the right word to choose, but I didn't have a personal relationship with God. I had religion. And religion taught me that I had to be a good girl and that I had to do the right thing. And then God would approve of me and God would love me. And that was basically what I operated off of. That was what I knew God as. And so when I hit the lowest point, I cried out to God and I was like, your word says that you're a comforter. I need you to prove it. Your word says that you're a healer. I need you to prove it. Your word says that you bring peace. Like, show me. That was all I said was, I'm going to need you to show me that you are who you say you are and not who I've known you to be, if that makes any sense. And um, he definitely showed up and I started to develop a personal relationship with him and realized that I had been wrong about him the whole time. I had grown up in religion, in Christianity my whole life, and I had still been wrong about him my whole life. And so I started developing my own personal relationship with him and getting to know him for myself and not just what church was telling me about him and not just what other people were telling me to believe about him. I really started digging deep and figuring it out for myself. And I say all of this to say that I'm not saying you have to be a Christian, okay? But this is part of my story. I can't tell my story without this piece of it. And so I hope you don't think that I'm trying to push anything on you or make you believe in something that you don't want to believe in. I'm totally not. I'm just sharing my experience and my story, and you don't have to be a Christian in order for the things that I'm going to teach you to apply. But as for this video, this is just the story of how I got to where I am. So after I cried out to God and he started showing me who he was. He started showing me that he's a loving father, that he does bring peace, that he does bring comfort in the hard times, that he is there for me no matter how tough life gets. And I started really wrestling with the hard questions of my faith, and that led me even closer to him. And so once I had established, okay, I know who you are. I know who you say that I am. and my life is drastically improving because I no longer feel worthless. I no longer feel like my identity is tied to the value that I have to offer. I no longer feel like I have to produce money in order to be valuable. All of these mindsets that I had were just starting to fall away one at a time because I was just realizing my worth and realizing who he said I was. And he said that I was priceless. He said that I was valuable. He said that he had a plan for me and a purpose for me, and that I didn't have to strive to get there. And so I'm just kind of bebopping around with God, living my life and getting to this point where I'm just kind of content. I was content on my little makeshift farm with my little family and just doing the everyday things, kind of going through the motions and not really um thinking about anything more. I wasn't striving for what's next, what's next, what's next. I was just kind of relaxing into this role of being a wife and a mom. And wouldn't you know, that's when he decided to shake things up. So, um, after my daughter was born, in 2021, and I had even more time to think and to pray because I was up with her all hours of the night. I was in the throes of the newborn phase, and I heard him just speak to me in my spirit. And what I mean by that is it's more like a thought that comes into your head, but you recognize that it's not coming from you. And I felt him say to me, I want you to get on TikTok and share what you've learned. And one thing that you have to understand about me is that I am not at all an in the spotlight kind of person. The spotlight makes me uncomfortable. People looking at me makes me uncomfortable because I've been so convinced throughout my life that there's something fundamentally wrong with me that I'm like, if I put myself in the spotlight, other people are going to find something wrong with me, and that's not okay. But again, this was where he was like, just do what I'm asking you to do. It's going to pay off. And so I had to deny what I thought was best. I had to deny my own self preservation in order to put myself out there and get on TikTok and share the things that I was learning about God. But I think there's a little bit of a side lesson here because I once heard a Brene Brown quote that said something along the lines of, everything I've achieved in my life, whether personally or professionally, I've always had to do it from a place of discomfort. It's never come to me comfortably. And I related to that so heavily because I just continually felt God asking me to get more and more uncomfortable with this journey that I was going on. But it wasn't for my disadvantage, it was for my benefit. I just couldn't see it at the time. So I had to act in faith, trusting that this next step I was going to take was going to lead me closer to a better, more fulfilled life. And so I got on TikTok. It took me about 3 days to work up the nerve to record my first video, but I finally did it, and it started to kind of just take off right away. And I wasn't expecting that at all. Um, I started to gain quite a following, and I amassed, up to that point in my life, to the point of the story that I'm telling, I had about 70,000 followers. This was in 2023. And so in 2023, I had amassed 70,000 followers ish on my TikTok page. And I had just been sharing, my perspective on faith and life and what I was learning and how I was being set free from all of the mindsets that I had been stuck in the past. And people were really resonating with it. So it grew this big following. And then in 2023, my son was old enough to go to kindergarten. And again, I'm praying about it because I'm like, God, I'm used to being home with my kids. I'll homeschool if you want me to. And I felt him leading me to put my son in school, even though that made me so sad because I had been all he had ever known. He had been all I had ever known. And I wasn't ready for that to end just yet. But again, I felt God telling me it was time for him to learn to be his own person, that we needed to have a little bit of separation, that I had built up this foundation that was going to serve him well, but that he had to learn how to be his own person. I had to learn to be my own person again. And so that was what I did. Again, I know that that decision's not right for everybody. I'm not saying do exactly as I do. I'm just showing you the process. So I put my son in school, and then I was like, what am I going to do with all this time? Like, my daughter's still a baby. She's taking naps all the time. I have all of this free time that I don't even know what to do with it. And a little while later, I again felt God saying to me, okay, now that you have all this free time, I want you to take everything that you've learned up until this point and I want you to put it in a book. And I thought, God, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to write a book. Are you crazy? How do you even start with that? And he said, just write it down. I'm not asking you to do anything groundbreaking. I'm not asking you to have these massive earth-shattering revelations to share with people. I'm just asking you to write down what I've already taught you. Just record it on paper. And so I quite literally opened a Google Doc and started recording it. And that Google Doc wound up being 30 pages long after I had finished my first draft. So it was very, very short. But through TikTok, I had actually connected with a couple of other people who were already authors who had published their first books and their second books. And they saw something in me that they felt connected to. And so they reached out to me and just started up a friendship. And through those friendships, I was able to kind of get their help learning how to self publish. I wound up self publishing that book through Amazon Katie, which I'll do videos on that. I'll do videos on that whole process, self publishing versus traditional publishing, marketing, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to cover all of that. But for the sake of this video, this is just my story of how I got here. So you can follow along if you want to see those videos that are going to come later. But these friendships, they led me through the whole process of um, writing my own book. And I had my mom and my mother-in-law edit it for me, and they helped me expand on a lot of my ideas. And so the book wound up being about 150 pages long by the end of the process. And so I publish it, I put it out there into the world. And the day that I published that book, I had the worst case of imposter syndrome that you could ever imagine. I told my husband, it's launch day. I should be ecstatic. I've always wanted to be an author, and here I am, a published author, and I feel like the world's biggest phony because I just couldn't shake these feelings of nobody's going to want to hear what I have to say. Everybody already knows the information I put in this book. I'm going to look like an idiot. What if I said something and 5 years down the road I disagree with what I said and I don't even support my own book anymore? I just had all of these thoughts just hammering me. And my husband said, "Hey, all God asked you to do is write the book. You wrote the book. You did the thing. Ta-da, you're done." And so I kind of had to release the outcome. But once I released the outcome, that was when God really got to work. And that book wound up selling over 10,000 copies in its first year of publication, which is wild. So I looked up the statistics on this because I can be a little bit of a nerd sometimes. And I just have to share this with you to show that I'm really not bragging on myself. I'm bragging on God and how impossible this situation was. Because what happened was I was posting the videos on TikTok and I was just mentioning, "Hey, I wrote a book if you wanted to check out more of the lessons that I've learned." And it just went crazy and people were buying it like hotcakes. And I looked it up. Actually, let me look it up. Let me look it up real quick because I have it right here. Here it is. Only 3 to 5% of books that are started actually get finished and published. Of that 3 to 5%, less than 2% sell over 10K copies in their first year. So I want you to think about all of the celebrities that write books every year, everybody that writes a tell-all memoir sort of book, all of the mega pastors and the influencers and all of these people who have these massive, massive, massive followings, they probably make up that 2% or the majority of that 2%, right? Because your people that are selling over 10,000 books in their first year of publication are not going to be your average Joe Schmoes. They're going to be the people who already have a following, right? So they probably make up a majority of that 2%, but here's where my mind was absolutely blown. I told you that I had 70,000 followers on TikTok. And so I'm sure people are going to say, "Oh, that's where your sales came from because you had a big following." Okay, hold on. Because in order to sell 10,000 copies to 70,000 people, that would be a 14% conversion rate. Okay. Do you know the statistical likelihood of a book converting that well? Normal conversion rates are 1 to 5% of sales. That means for 70,000 people, I should have sold around 700 copies, statistically speaking. That would have been a normal amount to sell, is like 700 to maybe, you know, a couple thousand copies. But 10,000 copies is a 14% conversion rate. That's exceptionally high. So the statistical likelihood of a relatively unknown author with a 70,000 person following to write a book, self-publish, and sell over 10,000 copies in the first year is 0.1%. 0.1% that would even be possible. So I'm sitting there thinking, that's wild, right? Because I couldn't do that, guys. Remember, I was a serial entrepreneur who failed at everything she tried. My worth was in the gutter. And then all of a sudden I developed this relationship with God. He's like, "Hey, here, try this thing that's going to make you a little bit uncomfortable." And then he just blew it up and blew it out of the water, because when I was doing it with him, then I couldn't fail, because he was guiding me the whole way. So again, not saying that you have to have God on your side for your book to be successful, but it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. And I am going to walk you through a lot of those lessons that he taught me along the way, and a lot of the ways that he guided me through writing my first book. So that's my story. That's how I became a successful author. And I just recently released my second book, which is called Leaving Defeat. Both my books are Christian books, by the way. So the first book was more so about my relationship with God, how I went from religion to relationship, and all of the things that God taught me about himself and about how I related to him that was completely opposite of what religion had taught me. So that was what my first book was about. And then I just released this one called Leaving Defeat, which is all about that darn rooster is back. I'm wrapping up. It's fine. But this book is all about the mindsets that kind of hold us back. We all have things that we struggle with: insecurity, fear, feeling worthless, etc. And so being able to shift from those kind of mindsets and into a place where you feel victorious and where you feel like you've kind of got a handle on this life thing, and you reach this point of quote unquote success where things are going well. I know that life doesn't always go well, but your mindset can play a big, big role in the outcome of your life. So that's what the second book is about. I just launched it and it is already doing pretty well as well. So I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about these future projects that I'm working on. I'm going to be talking about in the next few videos. I'm going to be really talking about the things that God walked me through publishing on Amazon KDP, marketing a book, self-publishing versus traditional publishing. What else? How to even write the book in the first place, like creating an outline, creating a first draft, how to edit, just all the things that go into writing a book. I mean, I've got 2 under my belt now, so I feel like I kind of got a little bit of a handle on things, and they're really resonating with the audiences that they've been put in front of. So let me know what you want to see next, what you want to see first. Because I've got a million different directions I could go in with these next few videos. And I'm also going to be talking about some of the projects that I'm about to start working on, because I feel like author is it's kind of what I'm meant to do with my life. I have way more books in me than just these 2. So I'm really about to get started with um those other projects. I want to write some children's books. I want to write a fiction series that I think is going to be so much fun. So if you're interested in writing your own book and just don't know where to start and need a little help, I'm your girl. Stay tuned and we'll walk through this journey together. But as for right now, I'm going to hop off and see y'all in the next video. Thanks for watching.